am so excited today. You guys, we have such a special guest in store for you today. Her name is Kim Gross, and I'm going to share a little bit about her bio, and then we're going to get into her autoimmune story and healing, and you are truly in for a treat today. So Kim Gross is the founder creator of the 5-Step Power Pathway. She helps people pleasers and perfectionists who have spent a lifetime of perpetual suffering because they have identified with these patterns. She helps guide clients on a journey of self-healing so that they can have more meaningful connections and have the courage to create the life they desire. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, we're so happy to have you here, and I'm excited for my audience to hear what you have to say and how you can help improve their lives with autoimmunity as well. So first, tell me a little bit about who are you, your story and your healing journey of your autoimmune disease and the autoimmune disease that you have.
Sure. So first, I'll start with what I have. I have Sjogren's syndrome, or now they call it Sjogren's disease, which I often will say is a sister disease, a cousin disease to MS, lupus, or even scleroderma, not so much. But my family has a history of lupus. So there's the genetic component. And I just happened to manifest with Sjogren's. I was diagnosed in 2005, but here's the thing. When I was 30, I had my first child. And that was 6 years prior to me getting the diagnosis. So I was 30 years old and I went to the doctors and I'm like, I am 30, but I feel like I'm in the body of an 80-year-old person. And they're like, oh, don't worry about it. This is normal. You just had a child. You're a mom. Of course, you're going to feel crappy. This is all very normal. And this kind of dismissive behavior from the doctors happened for 6 years. I literally felt like I was being a hypochondriac. I thought I was going crazy because I knew something wasn't right in my body, but I had all of these experts telling me that I was fine. And every test that I had done, I had so many freaking tests. I had an ENG done where I had water poured in one ear and out the other and made me so dizzy that I was like so nauseous. I had a tilt table test where I blacked out. I passed out. So I had a positive tilt table test, one test after another, all to say that nothing was wrong with me. Finally, I had an ophthalmologist, my eye doctor, who I went to because my eyes were so red and I thought it was allergies. And he said, Kim, this is not pink eye. This is not allergies. This is something systemic. There's something going on. You have inflammation in your eyes. I'm sending you to a rheumatologist. So I went to a rheumatologist in 2005. And when they took my blood work, that's when it showed that I was positive for Sjogren's. A positive SSA or SSB shows that you're positive. And that was like such a bittersweet feeling for me because on the one hand, at that moment, I felt like I had this death sentence of an autoimmune disease. I didn't know what it meant. And then on the other hand, I was like, thank God I wasn't crazy. Like something really was wrong for the last 6 years. I even had my husband disbelieving me, discounting my experience. He just thought I was making it up in my head. So that's really where it began for me with being diagnosed with Sjogren's syndrome.
So interesting. I find in my experience and a lot of my other clients' experience, and maybe some of the listeners out there now, that the autoimmune diseases are like the silent disease and they're misdiagnosed so often. for years. And some people live their whole life without being diagnosed because a lot of the symptoms are very similar to other things in life that doctors are traditional doctors traditionally diagnose. However, when you go back into a doctor year after year, not even just appointment after appointment, we're talking years at a time, right? Saying something's wrong, I don't feel good, there's something wrong in my body. And we all know our bodies best, right? Nobody knows our bodies better than us. And to still not get answers until you have to be your own self advocate always and continue to press and go to different doctors and go different avenues and see, what is happening so you can actually get a definitive answer. And sometimes we shy away from that because we may not want the answer. But in most cases, I truly do believe that we want the answer so we can have closure in what it is and then figure out the plan of action so we can start to feel better and start living instead of existing. So in your experience, Kim, can you please tell me, what was that process like for you? Because you mentioned that it was like 6 years in the making, but what was that? How did you feel? Can you share so we can kind of feel and be in that experience with you?
Well, it was even a double whammy because one of the reasons why it was so hard for me during that time was because I was such a people pleaser, right? And as a people pleaser and a perfectionist, I was conditioned and trained to not trust myself, to look for someone on the outside of me to give me the answer. Someone out there knows better than I do. Someone can tell me what's going on in my body better than I can. This is what happens. This is the prison of being a people pleaser and a perfectionist, is that you lose that connection to yourself. So as I'm going from one appointment to another, even though, as you said, you have to be your own best advocate, even though I took copious notes at every freaking appointment, every single symptom that I had, went in and showed them, look, this is what's been happening. And they still discounted me. And because they were the ones who were the quote experts, they were the doctors.
Right.
They must know. I believe them and not myself. So that's why finally in 2005, when the blood work showed that I had something, it was like, okay, I'm going back now. And I'm telling every freaking doctor that, they missed the mark. You missed the mark. I just not that I wasted 6 years, but I could have started on a path sooner, perhaps, of this healing that I eventually did get myself on once I had that diagnosis.
Absolutely. And, I find that it's so, being transparent, right? I was misdiagnosed for over 10 years as well. And it was by accident that I got diagnosed. Grateful and thankful. I went in for blood work for something else and I came out with Hashimoto's. I couldn't even pronounce it. It's a thyroid disorder, a disease, autoimmune. And I didn't even know it was happening. I thought my life was crumbling. And to think that what you said, I'm an ex-perfectionist as well and people pleaser. And it's very common with people who have autoimmune diseases to be perfectionists and have A personalities because of how our DNA is and how our body reacts to different situations and how our minds work, right? And so to think that you went to experts, I went to experts, whatever, a professional is, they're an expert in that field. A doctor, you feel that you go to a doctor to get help and get a diagnosis and then feel better, not to continuously get misdiagnosed, right? And feel worse and worse and worse. And to that point, I was going to doctors that had the book smarts of autoimmune disease within Hashimoto's, but they didn't have Hashimoto's. So how do they know how I feel? I have no idea because the blood work would be fine, but then I'd feel awful. And it seems very similar to what you were explaining to. You were going to the experts, wanting answers and not getting anything or anywhere because they missed the mark. Right. And I love that you said that. And that's so key and important because blood work can be the thing that they're missing the mark on, right? That professionals, doctors, providers are missing that mark because the blood work could be fine, but you feel terrible. You have all these other symptoms that aren't related to what the blood work is actually stating. So did you have that experience? Share a little bit more about that experience, or what was your experience with that in getting your diagnosis?
Well, because so many of my doctors were unfamiliar
Mm,
with Sjogren's syndrome, right?
yeah.
Nobody really, especially 18 years ago, they
Mm,
really did not know. My
mhm,
primary doctor was at least willing at the time that I got the diagnosis say, like, almost like, Kim, I'm so sorry. Like, I know nothing about this disease.
mm,
You're going to have to tell me. You're going to have to teach
wow.
me. Because she said when we were in med school, it was like a day or something
Mm,
that they may have focused on that particular disease. It was not
mhm,
something that they
mhm,
paid a lot of attention to. So when I was going to all those doctors, none of them would have had the foresight to even ever check for Sjogren's. They would never even check for, they should have checked for autoimmunity, because I did say that I had family history of lupus. So that would have
mm.
been a ding, like,
Right, like a
let's
trigger. Yeah.
a trigger. Let's do a full
Right.
panel of every autoimmune disease that there is, which is what the
Mm,
rheumatologist finally did when I went to one.
mhm,
But none of them were picking up on all the symptoms, putting the
yeah.
whole picture together.
Yeah.
And part of that is not to blame them either, because the way that the system is set up, it's almost rigged. So, in other
Mm,
words, when I went to the ear, nose, and throat doctor, I only talked about the ear, nose, and the throat. When I went
mm,
to the cardiologist, I talked about my cardiac symptoms.
mm,
When I went to the pulmonologist, I talked to him about my lungs. When I went to, the bone doctor, I talked about my joint pain. So I guess maybe it's more on the onus of the primary, because they're like the general contractor, to be able to take all the pieces of and put all the pieces of the puzzle together and
mhm,
say, we have something systemic going on here, or there's a whole body thing. Let's
mm,
investigate there. So that's why they just kept missing the mark for
yeah.
two reasons. Sjogren's was so unheard of. And two,
Mhm,
none of them were really looking at the whole person. They weren't
mm,
looking at me
yeah.
as a whole person.
Yeah.
They looked at me as a body. First of all, and they still continue to do this. I'll walk into this day when I go for my checkups or go in to the cardiology department. Man, oh, you're playing tennis? You box? You look great. You're doing great. And there in itself is so dismissive, because I'm
Mhm.
going in there and I'm telling them, look, I freaking am having palpitations. I can feel my heart
Easy.
jumping out of
Yeah.
my chest sometimes. I
Mhm.
get lightheaded. I don't feel well. And I tell them all the things. And then they're like, yeah, but you know what? You're still boxing. You're playing tennis. You're young.
Mhm.
You have,
Mhm. Yeah,
it's so frustrating.
it's so frustrating. And that happens to me all the time too. And, I guess it's, well, no fault to their own, right? But at the same point, they're the professionals. And so if they're not exercising their expertise, then they should flat out tell us, like, I can't help you, right? Or I love what your primary said, you're going to have to educate me. Okay, great. That's great. But I'm going to find a new doctor. But I appreciate you telling me up front instead of trying to help me and treat me long term when you have no idea what I have or what I'm going through or how my body feels on a daily basis. Right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and like looking fit, being able to do things is one thing, but having heart palpitations while you're doing it, having fatigue before, during, and after what, the event, that's not normal, right? And that's all related to the autoimmune disease. And how are the doctors helping us? And what do we do because of that? And I agree with you, Kim, that when you go to specialty doctors, they're only looking at that one specific, it's like a microscope in your body, right? They're not looking at the whole body and your whole function. And that's why I found functional medicine years ago, what saved my life, because the doctors in functional medicine look at your whole body as a whole in one, not individual pieces, and how they all interact together. So you don't need to go to 5 different doctors who don't talk at all and have no idea who you are. You can go to one one doctor and get answers that you need. And maybe you're deficient in this, but you need to do this and that, and whatever the case may be for the autoimmunity, but you're treated as a whole. And that is, I think, such a huge difference in the different practices of medicine and what we get to choose and who we choose to go to for our health and to keep living, for sure.
Yeah. And so what I started to do for myself was I started to look at all parts of me, my mind, my body, and my spirit. I started to really understand and believe in the mind-body connection. So I started seeking alternative therapies. I started acupuncture and healing touch and all these different modalities. But at the same time, I was working on healing my inner child shit, on working on healing all of the trauma from the past, because I know that that was stored in my body, and my body was just so dysregulated for most of my life. And if my body's in that constant state, I know from what I learned about having autoimmune that when I get into that autoimmune stress response, I'm going to have a flare up. I'm going to have a flare up. I'm going to flare. If I keep having and pumping that cortisol through my body all the time, I'm going to feel sick. I'm going to feel crappy. So it was learning, and it's been a long journey and a long process, but I have come to the other side where I have more freedom and I manage this so much better, so that now at 55, I can still box, I can still play tennis and do the things I do. And I have been able to also heal all of that stuff as well. Thus the people pleasing and perfectionism, because those are trauma responses.
Yes. Absolutely. And what you just said, healing the childhood trauma. So there's so many people out there that have no idea what that is, first of all. And secondly, that it even plays an effect or a factor in their autoimmune disease, right? Is it the reason they have an autoimmune disease? Probably not. Is it the reason why their anxiety, their stress levels, their cortisol levels are off the charts? Absolutely, 100% could be, right? And working internally and finding the calm in the storm is so important and key, super, super key to healing your autoimmune disease. And that's what no doctor, no matter what practitioner you're seeing, could ever tell you or help you with, right? And that's where coaching comes in. And that's where looking into yourself inwardly, because that internal beat, that internal rhythm, if you're not in touch with that and you haven't dealt with that crap from the past, it's always going to be there. It's always going to be weighing on your shoulders. And whether you believe it or not, it's causing stress internally, which is causing your body to be not in alignment. Therefore, having flare-ups, therefore not feeling well and having to go on more medicine or more supplementation or just not being able to function. So until we deal with that inner child, we're never going to feel better, because we're all a product of our childhood, whether we want to believe it or not. Whatever you're masking, whatever you're, ignoring from your childhood that is present in your daily life every single day is affecting you, is affecting how you function, is affecting you as a person, is affecting your autoimmune disease. And until you get a hold of that and do something about it, taking action on it and finding tools to help you, you're never going to heal.
And I totally agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that's such a key point in autoimmunity that most people don't talk about, or it's even recognizable. And it's so recognizable in our daily life if we actually just looked in the mirror.
And whether we have autoimmune or not, it's still such an important thing to pay attention to. I just had a call with my daughter just before we got on, and she had something that she was upset about, and she's 21. So she understands the lingo. We talk back and forth. When I first got on the call with her, her energy was very low. She was very much in this victim place of why me, my life sucks, I hate my life stuff. And then we started to talk about the situation. And then I was able to help her, and she was able to see that it was an inner child pattern. It was her little girl that was being
Mm.
activated and feeling a certain way with this particular person.
Mhm.
And then when she was able to see that, by the time we finished the conversation, we did this in 10 freaking minutes. But I've been doing this a long time with her, and she's a psychology major. So it's been in the making for a while. But by the end of that 10 minutes, her energy shifted so much. And I said to her, Ange, I said, what did you feel like 10 minutes ago? Blah, 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 down. I felt like a victim. I said, what do you feel like now? And she said, I feel strong. I feel empowered. I feel different. Like, I want to fight. So she was able to see that her little girl just needed some nurturing, and how quickly she was able to shift her energy.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that amazing? And it's really powerful. I've had experiences like that, what you just mentioned, with myself, as well as coaching other clients and just helping, my sister or another family member, my brother, whoever it is, right? Not that I'm coaching them, but I'm just being a good friend, excuse me, and listening to them and hearing them, right? Because most people just want to be heard. Most people are not heard, right? So if you actually just listen and hear people, then you can respond and actually help them through your heart. And that's the inner heart work that we get to do and be every single day. So if you could share with me, I'm really curious to hear a little bit more about Masks Off and how you found your authentic self by identifying the masks that you wear and how to unmask.
So I just started Masks Off 3.5 years ago, just as like a hobby with a friend. I originally had a co-host, and we used to just talk about these different things. Said, let's do a podcast. We called it Masks Off. And then it really started to morph and evolve into the people pleasing and the perfectionism. I always knew that I had both those tendencies, but in the last several years, I really started to dive in deep to my patterns, because that's what a mask is, right? A mask is another way of identifying what our patterns are, how we are showing up in the world that is not being our true and authentic self. The mask is how we put ourselves out there so that we think we will be accepted and belong. Because at the heart of it, that's what we all want. We all want to know that we are worthy of love and belonging. The problem is we go about it in this misguided way by wearing the masks, because we're too afraid to be our true selves. So we're like, let me just do everything you want me to do. I'll say whatever you want to say. Let me just perfect. Let me perform. Let me be this. Let me be that, instead of being who we truly are. Mm-hmm. And so I knew that having that disconnect from my true and authentic self was also making me sick, very sick. So as I came into more wholeness and connecting with that part of myself, that also allowed me to heal mind, body, and spirit, thus healing the autoimmune as well.
That's incredible. And kudos to you and everybody that you help with that. Because, when you say that masks are just patterns, I relate that to somebody that I'm working with, or someone that doesn't feel they need help, but yet they've changed their nutrition, but they changed their nutrition the same way. They last for 6 weeks, and then they fall off the wagon. And then they do it again for 6 weeks and they fall off the wagon. And they're in this hamster wheel and nothing changes. Or they go to the gym and they want to work out and they want to lose weight. And so they go to the gym, but they don't change their nutrition. And they last about 4 to 6 weeks, right? And they do it again 4 weeks later, and they last 4 to 6 weeks. And it's this hamster wheel. And so it's really the definition of insanity, right? When you do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, that's insanity. And so by masking, it's, the patterns, but what you said is so key, is having the awareness of what you're doing, right? Because if we all had the awareness of what we were doing, then we would be able to change. We'd be able to feel better. We'd be able to have that mind, body, and soul connection internally, which heals or helps to heal our autoimmune disease. And so I really believe that when we do it all together and put it together, I call it a toolbox. Okay. I call it a toolbox. When we put our mind, body, and soul together, and we have the awareness of the masks, which are the patterns that are causing us to feel like crap and not heal our autoimmune disease, then we can use those tools to be a model of positive change. right? To change the behaviors, to change our thought patterns, to change the mindset, to release our childhood traumas and really be who we authentically were meant to be on this planet and placed on this earth. So I am so grateful that we were able to have this conversation, Kim, because it really is eye-opening in who we are authentically, how we heal our autoimmune disease, and what we can do to change the pattern so we don't have our masks on 24/7.
I 100% agree. I love the conversation as well. I could talk about it 24/7.
Me too. We could keep going and going. So if listeners want to get in touch with you, they have questions for you, how can they reach you, Kim?
The easiest spot is my website, kimgrosscoaching.com. On there, it has all the social medias. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. My podcast is on there. So kimgrosscoaching.com. My email's there as well. And I have a quiz on my website. If you are wondering whether or not you have perfectionistic or people-pleasing tendencies, I have a quiz for that. It's very short, super fun, and everything is right there.
Amazing. I'm so excited to check that out. Curious what'll come up. And I want to thank you again for spending the time today with us here on the Robyn Engelson Podcast. Thanks, Kim.
Thanks so much, Robyn.
You're welcome.